For this lesson, you need to open the sample file Mortgage Calculator 4 from your Sample Files folder. I'll begin this lesson by changing the screen view so that you can see all of the rows in this worksheet on screen at the same time. First of all, I'll reduce the scaling to 75%. Then I'll click the Ribbon Display Options button and AutoHide the ribbon. And now you can see all of the rows. In the previous lessons, you created a user interface using Excel's form controls. The form now collects data from the user and then uses this data to update the input cells. In this lesson, you'll use the input cells to calculate the result cells, and then you'll use some of the result cells to update the form. So now we have the big picture, let's return to 100% scaling. And we can work on our first formula, and this will be the amount financed. So I click in cell D32, press equals on the keyboard, and the amount financed will be the property price minus the property price multiplied by the deposit percentage, and then I need to add the arrangement fee. And when I press the Enter key, you can see that for this loan, the amount financed is $250,000. Now we're going to compute the monthly repayment using the PMT function that you learned to use in Lesson 3.3. To do that, I'll press equals on the keyboard, then I'll click at the top of the screen to bring back the ribbon, the Formulas tab on the ribbon. In the function library group, this is a financial function. I'll scroll down until I see the PMT function, and for the rate argument, I'll click on the interest rate in cell D28, and then divide by 12 for a monthly interest rate. For the number of repayments, I'll click on the term in cell D27 and multiply by 12 to convert the term in years into the term in months. And the last parameter is PV, the present value, in other words, the amount financed. So I'll click on cell D32, and when I click OK, I can see that the monthly repayment for this loan will be $1,419.47. I think for presentation reasons, I'd rather this was a positive number and not a negative number, so I'll place a minus operator in front of the P of PMT and press the Enter key, and the negative number is now converted into a positive number. For the total repaid, well, I'll press equals. The monthly repayment multiplied by the term in years multiplied by 12 will be the addition of all the payments that will be made. And in this case, that's 511,010. For the total interest, well, that will be the total amount repaid minus the amount financed. So equals the total amount repaid minus the amount financed. So for this loan, the borrower will pay $261,010 in interest. Now for the affordability. How much will these monthly repayments be when expressed as a percentage of the borrower's income? Well, I'll type equals and click on the monthly repayment and multiply it by 12 to work out what an annual payment would be. Then I'll divide this annual payment by the borrower's annual income after tax. And when I press the Enter key, I can see that for this loan and for this borrower, the repayments will consume 45% of their after-tax income. Now I'm going to connect two of these result cells with the corresponding cells in the user interface. So for the monthly payment in cell D20, I'll click in cell D20, press the equals key, and then click on the monthly repayment result cell to show the same value in the user interface. And for the amount financed, I'll click in cell D10, equals on the keyboard, and then I'll click on the amount financed in the result cell D32, and then I'll press the Enter key. Now we can test that the formulas are working correctly. If you enter the same values into your form that I'm going to enter into mine, you can compare your result cells with mine, and that will prove that you've created the form correctly. First of all, the property price. I'll stay with $350,000 for that. The deposit, well, I'll bring that down to 20%. The arrangement fee I'll leave at $5,000, and your first result cell, the amount financed, should now read $285,000. For the term, I think I'll reduce that from 30 years to 25 years. And for the interest rate, instead of 5.5%, I'll go for 5.0%. And if everything's gone well, you should see the monthly payment of 1666.08 on your screen. And if you then scroll down to the result cells, all of your result cells should be exactly the same as my result cells that you're seeing on the screen here. Before closing this lesson, I'll bring the ribbon back by clicking the Ribbon Display Options button and then Show Tabs and Commands. And all that remains is to save my work. I'm going to save with the new name Mortgage Calculator 5, and as usual, I'll save to the folder above my Sample Files folder. I click the Save button, and you've now completed Lesson 9.4. Connect result cells to a form.